Night Watchman of Reddit, what is the creepiest situation you've been in on shift? I used to work as a night watchman on a large property. Not just a big building, but a large surrounding property as well. Probably 50 acres. Well, this property was not in the best of areas. It was kind of secluded, but had a subdivision nearby. Anyways, it had a really long driveway that was gated. One night I start my rounds by walking out the front door of the place, which was all lit up. As soon as I lock the door behind me and take a step, I hear a woman's voice scream, "Oh my god, somebody please help me," up at the end of the driveway. It was somewhat faint, and I took 5 running steps into the driveway, skidded to a stop, and ran back inside to call the cops. They responded with multiple police cars and even a helicopter. They found absolutely nothing. I still think it could have been someone trying to lure me out there. Last year I worked as night shift security at this place called the Desert Museum, which is essentially a zoo and botanical garden that showcases a different life found in the Sonoran Desert. It's a phenomenal place, BTW. Highly recommend a visit if you find yourself in Tucson, Arizona. So towards the end of closing time all the employees leave, and I lock the whole place up, including the main gates into the place. Eventually later in the night I have to go open up the gate for the custodians to leave, and while I was waiting I got bored and started playing with my flashlight. So I shine my flashlight onto a hill across the street and see these 2 really weird glowing orbs, but once I turn the light off I can't see them anymore. And keep in mind, this place is in the middle of nowhere with a new moon. Everything is pitch black. I keep playing around with it, trying to figure out what these weird reflective orbs are, until they suddenly start to move, and I realize I'm an idiot because those glowing orbs were actually eyeballs, and suddenly I can see a full-grown mountain lion that I've unknowingly been having a staring contest with for the last 15 minutes. I used to work at City Hall a few years ago as a security guard. There were abandoned jail cells in the basement that haven't been used in years. Part of my duties was to patrol them for any squatters. It was probably my second time patrolling alone and things started to get really fucking weird. I went down to the old prison/holding cells, and it's a long narrow hallway about 6 meters wide and 100 meters long with cells on both sides. The hallway was lit with light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. I was walking past the 4th column of cells when the lights went out. I turned my flashlight on and walked back towards the light switch. Right when I was about to turn them back on, the lights flickered on again. I thought to myself, this is fucked, I'm getting out to here. I started walking fast past the cells while quickly checking them. I was about halfway when the lights went off again. I heard 2 cells slam. I fucking ran with my flashlight on straight toward the other end of the hallway. I reached the end and ran up to my workstation. I then called my supervisor and asked him if there were any electrical issues that have been reported. He said no. I had 2 hours left on my shift and couldn't leave. I was at my workstation paranoid as fuck and shitting my pants. I worked in an abandoned hospital for a while, and it was full of WTF it seemed every damn night. Everything had logical explanations, but working in there alone at night was a trip. First, the doors in the stairwells had gas piston hinges that wouldn't really close the door and slowly leak out. You get the other end of the hallway and the stairwell door would slam loudly, as if someone slammed the door closed. Took me a week to figure out the pattern of which doors did it. The elevators were somehow rigged together, so you would go from one floor to the next, and when the door opened, the elevator across the hall or next to you would be closing like you just missed someone getting in. This shit was totally random. I once turned on the PA system with a radio next to it, so I could have music throughout the building. I thought I was clever till it turned itself off when I was in another part of the building. Had an auto timeout switch. I once walked to the emergency room and there was this bloody dude holding his arm just outside the door staring at me. I froze and we just stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity plus a few hours. Then he tells me to let him in because he broke his arm. I tell him this is an abandoned hospital and he just walks out into the darkness without saying another word. Once was doing floors at night at this pipeline fittings company in the middle of the Bonnets and looked up and there was this have eyes looking dude on crutches banging on the door. Tells me to open the door and he needs a ride because his van had broken down. The guy had his right leg all bandaged up, so was pretty sure he was laying. Told him no thank you and he just laughed and hobbled into the night. That job was bad for my nerves. I was a night shift security guard at a hospital when I was 20. This was a relatively nice suburban hospital, no trauma unit, so there wasn't a lot going on at night. We made rounds and occasionally helped to strap angry people down in the ER. Mostly, we checked people into the morgue. There was a logbook that had to be signed by the guard and the nurse, and paperwork that had to be filed for every corpse that came downstairs. The morgue was really small. A freezer that had room for maybe 2 gurneys, and 1 table for bodies in the main room. Around the table were all kinds of plastic containers with biohazard labels. Most had parts that I couldn't identify. One was full of eyeballs. Seriously. I have no idea what they were for. One night I got a call over the radio that a body was headed downstairs. I went to meet the nurse and saw she was carrying a small blanket. Stillborn. We went into the morgue and she laid the bundle down on the table, unwrapping the blanket and revealing a tiny, discolored baby. She checked the tag on it and realized that she had forgotten the paperwork. Corpses are unnerving in their stillness. Bodies move, breath flows, muscles twitch, but not the dead. Not this baby. I stood there with it for a good 10 minutes, my eyes locked to it, waiting for the nurse to return with the papers. Part of the anxiety was the inevitable horror movie playing in my head, where the baby opens its eyes and looks at me. But part of it was just the uncomfortable confrontation with death I was having. Being outside on a dark, windy night. I work at a power plant. It's not so bad when the plant is running and you can hear the hum of equipment all around you, but when everything is shut down, you can hear the creaking of all of the metal structures and listen to the groan of the 200 feet tall stack as it sways in the wind. Then there's the whistling and moaning sound the wind makes as it blows through. Couple that with coyotes howling in the woods nearby and you've got yourself a nice basket of nope. Being out in that is what I get paid for though, so off I go. I used to work for a relatively small security company. It was privately owned, had about 30 employees altogether. They'd get a contract with a factory and then basically your job was to sit in that factory for 8 to 12 hours when no one was working in it. So I'd be working by myself, alone, overnight, in a completely empty factory. In my 2 years of doing that job, I never one time saw a single thing I would call supernatural. However, I did see this. One night my captain calls me on my phone and tells me a new trainee will be coming in about 5 AM and to show him the ropes, teach him how to make rounds. You walk around the building. That's basically what making a round is, etc. So it's about 4:45 AM and I step outside to the parking lot to have a smoke and wait on the new guy. After about 10 minutes a car pulls up, stops, backs up, and drives away. I was clearly visible, so I have no idea why he left, but the car passed by about 3 to 4 more times before finally pulling in and shutting off the engine. I can see him in the car and he's just sitting in the driver's seat staring at me. In the back seat are 2 kids probably around 6 to 8. After about 3 minutes of me wondering what the fuck is going on, he gets out of the car. Dennis is fucked up looking. He's about 4 feet 10 and fatter than damn near anyone I have ever seen. He has a huge rash covering about 70% of his body with a white crust outlining most of it. He then speaks, had a little trouble finding the place, his voice is high-pitched. I mean really high-pitched. I'm talking Judge Doom in the final scene of Who Framed Roger Rabbit high-pitched. Then he extends his hand to shake mine. Without thinking much, I shake it. There's 1 finger on it. 1. And the rest of the hand looks like some kind of stumpy flesh mitten. One of the kids gets out of the car, has the same rash, is also very fat, is also missing fingers. He says, "Daddy, can I get a drink?" Dennis turns around and screams in that high-pitched voice, "Get back in the damn car, and don't you get out again." I'm in fucking shock. So I take the guy around the factory, show him the perimeter, tell him where emergency stuff is. About a minute into our walk I notice this guy smells like hell. I mean he literally reeks of bull sweat and fresh diarrhea. The whole time he's asking me strange questions, like, do you have a crush on anyone that works here? Or, can I hunt on this property? He finally leaves, after standing in the office trying to make small talk with me for about 15 minutes after the tour. On his way out he said, "We are gonna be good friends. Even if you don't think so now." I went home about 2 hours later, and stood in the shower for a good solid hour washing myself, trying to get the image of that guy out of my head. Called my captain, and asked him to reassign me someplace else. Never had to see him again. That's been more than 10 years and it still bothers me. I worked a security gig in an abandoned hotel, which sat directly on the river. When the rooms had balconies, they would hang out over the water. The hotel had closed down, and had been stripped bare by the owners. I'm sitting in the office, and I hear a creak. Creak, creak, from left to right on the floor above me. The hotel was wood frame, and creaked like a house when someone walked around. This sounded exactly like someone walking the hall on the floor directly above the office. I go up to the next level, and into the hall. The hotel itself was only 4 floors high, but long. The hall was bare walls, rooms with no doors, and only a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling in the middle of the hall. I have seen my share of horror movies, and know this can only be trouble, but I start walking down the hall anyway. After all, it's my job to keep people out. I get about quarter way down the hall, and I hear rustling coming from a room. I draw my maglite, one of the 3 C-cell ones, and get ready to use it. I slowly peek into the room, and discover that it's the wind blowing in from the river, and moving a curtain. Now freaked, I start checking the other floors and find nothing, but I know someone is in the building. I make my way back down to the ground floor, still finding nothing, and go into the old ballroom. It's a wide open space, and I start walking through it. Out of the corner of my eye, I see someone moving, so I turn, and shine my light on them, ready to defend myself. That's when I realize that it was my reflection in a broken mirror on the wall. After that, I noped the hell out of there, and spent the rest of the night in my car in the parking lot. About 2 weeks after that, the place burned down. After all this time, I'm still convinced that someone was in the building, but I never found any evidence that there was. Thanks for watching, and share your stories. Don't forget to consider the idea to maybe think about potentially subscribing. Peace.